Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Perpetual Chess. We have a return guest I'm excited to welcome in a moment, but did want to thank our sponsors. First and foremost, thanks to chessable.com. So a lot of you may have heard my interview with candidate master Azel Schwa, who had a breakout hit course on chessable and calculation. Now he's got a new one on visualization. So be sure to check that out. Also wanted to give a shout out to our partner sites like Chess Mood and Chess Dojo. Noel Studer's training videos, all that stuff. We have rolling deals and discounts on the Perpetual Partners page. So just take a look if you're interested in signing up. Also, chess.com premium memberships. And if you're signing up anyway, you may just get a discount or a free month or something like that. Now, as for our guest, so this is someone who it's very timely to speak with. He was on the podcast first, episode 291, August 2022. He actually talked a lot about how to make adjustments as an older player. And as we'll talk about today, he has embodied that. He is living it. He's also been on the pod to discuss the Fast Track My System book, which he edited. That's from about a year ago. And we talked about the Hans Niemann drama when that happened. As for his chess resume, it is quite lengthy. He's a stalwart in the U.S. chess scene. He's a champion of 4 different states and the champion of Tennessee, where he currently lives. He's part of a 3-generation chess family. His dad was a master level chess player in the former Soviet Union. His son Mitch is a USCF master. He's been working in finance since the age of 24, but he actually took some time away, and for the first time at age 57 has been pursuing chess full time, and perhaps not coincidentally just added another huge mark on his resume when he won the U.S. Senior Invitational, which in addition to the prestige, I think he took home like around $22,000. He beat out a lot of American legends, Grandmasters Kaidanov and Golden, and in the tiebreak, he beat out Vladimir Kopian and Alexander Shabalov, who tied with him for first, but Alex won in the tiebreak. And he's didn't even stop there. He then went on to tie for first in the Irwin Invitational at the U.S. Open, and then played the U.S. Open, where even then he had a decent result, broke about even in USCF rating, but didn't win the tournament. So he's slacking a little bit. But nonetheless, I'm excited to welcome back to the program Grandmaster Alex Fishbein. Welcome, Alex.
Well, Ben, thanks for having me. Thanks for that introduction. It's always an honor to be on your show.
Yeah, congratulations. I know that a lot of people chiming in on your Facebook page, especially for the Senior Invitational. But then you just go on and keep playing. And you were just telling me you've got another one, Alex. I don't know how you do it, but I'm excited to find out.
Yeah, well, this period is a little unusual for me. I mean, the Irwin is something I had to play, and it just sort of coincided with it was just 2 days after the senior closed, and there's no real choice there. Well, you know, at the time that I qualified for the Irwin, which was back in, you know, I had to win the Tennessee senior to qualify for the Irwin. The goal of that was to try to qualify for next year's senior. But I guess now with having won this one, I should qualify automatically as the defending champion. Once your federation submits you for the Irwin, there was only a 2-day notice to then say that, you know, somebody, I mean, and plus it's a good tournament to begin. It's a good tournament in itself. It's a decent prize fund, and, you know, it's a fairly strong tournament. So the Irwin was not an option not to play in. And then the U.S. Open was right after that. Unfortunately, you had to take a half-point bye, and a lot of the, you know, it didn't just affect the Irwin people. It also affected the other Denker and the other, you know, the other invitationals. They couldn't play in the U.S. Open without taking a half-point bye, and then had to play in the 4-day schedule. But I said, like, look, I'm playing well, and if I continue playing well, then I'll try the U.S. Open. What's the worst that'll happen if I start just collapsing? I mean, unless I physically die, right. the worst that can happen is I lose a couple of games. Well, then I'll just drop out, you know. So, but I finished the tournament. I lost 2 games, but I lost to very strong grandmasters, and I beat everybody else at the U.S. Open. So it wasn't a great tournament, but I was very, very tired at the end. Now I have a few days break, and the Washington International is a very prestigious. It's a very strong tournament. It's very good conditions there. I like playing there. I've had good results there. It's going to be tough to play after this period, but I'll just do my best.
Yeah, well, so far so good. And just as an explainer, especially for international listeners. So the Irwin Invitational is, as Alex alluded to, it's senior state champions get invited to a special tournament at the U.S. Open, which is another big open tournament that U.S. chess puts on. And the Denker he alluded to is a tournament for high school champions. So they've got all these sort of special events, everyone together, and then the sort of flagship event, the U.S. Open. So it's a special opportunity. And I know since I'm 48, I'm approaching that age, Alex. I know that the Irwin in particular, a lot of people, like, it becomes something to get excited for, something to train for, because, like, you know, a grandmaster like you is going to be a favorite to win your state, but even, you know, a player like me can at least, you know, have dreams of having a good tournament, winning their state, and then getting to go to an event like that.
But also with the Irwin, you know, you play some of your friends, which is another. I mean, that's also obviously true for the senior close, but they're also, and like, I feel good that I tied for first with Stuart Rachels, who's a friend of mine.
Right.
He's been on your podcast, of course. He's a really good guy and a friend of mine, and we talk a lot. And yeah, we tied for first, and you know, and there's some other people there who were friends of mine. Like, for example, you know, one guy from Wyoming, Dan Jolson, who was like somebody who I've known since I was in 6th grade or 7th grade. So you see a lot of old friends in that tournament too.
Yeah, and that comes across. And I was surprised to even see Stuart Rachels play, because last I checked, he'd been retired. Did he tell you the story behind his unretiring?
Yeah, I mean, he decided to come back to chess about like a year ago or a little less. You know, he just came back and you know, and played in a couple of tournaments. I think part of it is that there's a senior circuit. I mean, the senior circuit is interesting. He played, for example, in the senior, he qualified by rating for the senior team, World Senior Team Championship, which he played in.
Oh, okay.
And that was in February, I think, in Prague, and our team won first place. So he's actually a world champion now, which he's very proud of. And he, you know, he's a very talented player and a very good player. And I think he's also, as I understand it, he's kind of retired from his job as a professor at, so what university was it?
I think it was Alabama.
It's somewhere in Alabama,
Yeah.
right? So he was a professor of philosophy, and I think he's retired now. So that's another reason.
Okay, yeah. And for listeners, his book, The Best I Saw in Chess, which as Alex alluded to, when I interviewed him, we discussed, it's a great book. But anyway, this is not a Stuart Rachels podcast. Sorry, Stuart. We got to get back to the topic at hand.
Yeah.
So, Alex, you wrote on your Facebook page and alluded to, you did a post-game interview with Yasser Seirawan and Nazi Poughkeepsie that I really enjoyed, where you alluded to some changes in your training methods based on your age. And that's really why that's when I had to email you. Message you.
Yeah.
So what'd you do?
Okay. All right. That's a long story. So a couple of things there. What are the specific ways of preparing for this tournament, and what are the changes in preparation based on your age? So number one, as for this tournament, it's sort of happened coincidentally, more or less, that I stopped working my day job, which was on Wall Street. And one of the reasons for that was we had moved to Tennessee about 4 years ago, and I still continued working there remotely. So my job didn't really change, but it was like I was logging in from home, and I was visiting the office every like 2 months or so on average. And during the pandemic, when I did that, sort of nobody noticed because everybody was working remotely anyway. But then after the pandemic, right, people started opening up, and everybody came back to the office, but I didn't. And so then there were policies about like working, how many days a week can you work from home. TD Bank, where I was working, took a relatively severe policy where saying that you really can't work from home at all. And that was as of like a year ago, I think, maybe a couple years ago. And so I kind of saw the writing on the wall. It was clear that I wouldn't be able to do that job for the foreseeable, in the near future. I'd have to do something else. So, and we left in very good terms, but that was like, I think, in October of last year. And I mean, I didn't want to come back to New York. So, but then I kind of like, by then I had already qualified for the senior closed, and I knew that because I won the senior open last year, so I knew I was going to be in. And I thought to myself, like, I'm 57, never really played professionally except for maybe for a couple of years when I had the Sanford Fellowship, which was a long time ago. And I've always played. I've played actively especially the last few years, and I've always studied. There was never been a day that I didn't look at chess, but I never really devoted to my time to it full time, right? And it's something that obviously is a passion for me, right? And I thought this might not be a bad time to do that, given that I have this tournament coming. So I decided just to do that. So that's part of it. And the tournament itself is obviously, most of these players are legends. And I mean, and I don't say that lightly, right? A lot of them are much more talented players than I am, I would say, right? Most of them have much higher peak FIDE ratings, are probably higher by 100 points on average than mine. And their peak results are not comparable to mine. I mean, for example, many of them have been U.S. champions, and I only qualified for the U.S. championship a few times, right? I didn't come that close to winning it. And at a younger age, they're also had better results. Like Max Lugi, for example, was world junior champion. I never even qualified for a world junior championship. So bottom line is this is a very illustrious field, right? In addition, they all have, well, not coincidentally, they all have very good scores against me, most of these guys. And in particular, this group was very difficult for me, has been very difficult for me to play historically. So on the other hand, I'm younger than many of them, right? And that actually makes a difference at this age also, I've found. And we'll talk about that a little later. I think the difference between 55 and let's say 65 is probably more than the difference in terms of playing ability and your level of calculation and things. More important than the difference between, let's say, 25 and 35 or 35 and 45. Because this is the age where it becomes hard to play. Okay? So when I've experienced that, I know that. And reading things like Korchnoi has written, for example, I know that from his experience as well. So I thought that this was kind of a window for me to perform perhaps as well as these guys, right? Or maybe even better in a good day. In addition, and maybe even more importantly, I play chess very actively. I've stayed very active in tournaments, but most of these players have not, right? Some of them have, like for example, Shabalov still plays quite a bit, but even Shabalov in the last couple of years has largely stayed away from, opens, which are the trenches of chess, right? You're playing in these weekend Swisses against 12-year-old kids. That's hard, okay? And he's played in some of them, okay, but has largely stayed away from them. He's played, but he's played more than the other people have played even less for the most part. Like for example, Larry Christensen only plays once a year, and it's in the senior closed, right? Max Lugi plays mostly just Blitz, and in Blitz you don't need to. Your stamina level doesn't have to be as high. So some of them play actively, but most of them don't. And there I thought I had a big advantage over them just because of, the ability to have more energy toward the end of the game. So that's number 2. And then number 3, slightly younger than many of them, not all. Having experience in playing tournaments recently, and playing a lot. And 3, I think that I study I have I work on my own game. And part of it is because I play. If you don't play, you're not going to be incentivized to improve your game because there is no game to improve, right? If you're not playing, I talk to a lot of people who say, well, how do I improve my calculation? How to do this? And I seem to have trouble calculating. And I ask them how do you know that? Well, how many times do you play? What's your, do you have a sample set of games that you played? And, half the time they say, well, I really haven't played in about a year or 2 years. And well, if you haven't played in a year, you don't really know what your strengths and weaknesses are, right? Blitz is not the same thing. Online Blitz has nothing to do with over the board chess. It's a completely different skill set, right? It's intuition. It's mouse skills sometimes, it's a completely different skill. Maybe I'm only slightly exaggerating. It's a different skill set than over the board chess. So because I play a lot, I have to study because otherwise how do you keep the you go from tournament to tournament. You have a bad tournament. What do you do? Well, you have to figure out what you did wrong and improve to the next tournament. So the combination of studying hard on my own game, which, you have to be incentivized to do that. And as a result of playing a lot and then being slightly younger, those three things I thought gave me an advantage over my competition, which could compensate for their talent bordering on genius compared to me.
Could and did, as it turned out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we had a question from Patreon supporter of the pod, Chris Wainscott, who I believe you saw in Wisconsin.
Sure.
And he asked if you could elaborate on the differences in how you prepare as an amateur or how you used to prepare as an amateur rather than now where you're able to devote more time to it as a professional sort of for the first time.
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure that part is different it's just that I played less, but I probably did similar things in terms of, well, I don't know. It's a little more intense and it's kind of more individualized. So there's a couple of things that I think I did differently. And there's one that I think we've discussed before, like the solitaire chess method.
Yeah.
Which is not going to be new. But then there's another method which I kind of started using more recently, although I had used it before, which I want to bring out, which I think is new. So first, the solitaire chess. So I think that the difference there is when you start playing a lot, right, you notice from tournament to tournament that when you start playing a lot of games, you can start making generalizations about what your weaknesses really are. If you're playing 50 games a year, which is about, 4 games a month, 4 games is not enough. 4 games a month is not enough to figure out what your weaknesses really are. Okay.
Which is depressing for a lot of people to hear, because that's what a lot of people aspire to play. Like, it's hard to play 4 games a month.
Yeah. Well, then maybe you have to play a little bit more online and not just blitz, but, rapid or slower time controls. But again, those are going to be, the games that are more important are the games that are going to be more relevant. You're playing in actual tournaments with rating points or prize money. Those are games where you take more responsibility for your moves. But I would say, at a minimum, you have to play at least like something like 7 or 8 games a month to be able to have a good sense of what your strengths and weaknesses are. So what I do is after every tournament, I kind of go through all the games that I played, annotate them, right? I try to do it quickly after the tournament. This is probably where not having to work helps, because I don't have a few days of where I'm busy doing something, right? I can spend the next day or two it's important to do it quickly because you're going to forget what you were thinking during the game, right? You're going to forget in a couple of days. You won't remember what variations you looked at or why you played or why you made certain decisions. It's not enough just to figure out what mistakes you made. The computer can tell you that, right? And a lot of people say, well, you should look at your games without an engine too. I kind of I don't have a strong opinion there. It depends, right? So for some people, that one makes sense, the other. For other people, it makes sense to just look at it with an engine. But in either case, the important thing is, what are the mistakes you made? Why did you make them? And is there a pattern around those mistakes? Okay. So does that make sense so far?
Yep.
Okay. So for instance, one example was I played in November last year, I played in the US Masters, and I had a couple of games where I traded down, or I was supposed to trade down into a winning rook ending. Okay, so winning rook ending, and each time I didn't do it. I was afraid the rook ending would be drawn. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to win the rook ending because I didn't have enough technique, like not enough confidence or something. So I kind of kept more pieces on the board. So that's like a very specific kind of problem. So then what I did, and I'm very lucky because, as you mentioned, Mitch, my son, is a national master, and he actually helps me with my chess probably as much or more than I help him at this point. So he's able to select the solitaire chess game. So solitaire chess, just for kind of a background. So I take a game of a strong player and I try to guess the moves, right? Guess one move at a time, usually using chess-based training mode. There's also other ways I think you've mentioned.
Yeah, like Lee Chess
on your
Study.
podcast recently, Lee Chess Study, right? There's other ways of doing it. So, and I'm basically guessing, I'm making a move. My opponent makes, my virtual opponent on the board. And I do it with a real chessboard, right? And clock. It doesn't really matter how much time I spend. The clock is just there, just sort of for for atmosphere. You
Right.
need to have doesn't matter. I don't usually, sometimes I give myself actual time limits, but usually I don't. And then if I make the right move, I write down that I make the right move. If I don't make the right move, I write down what the move was and then later figure out whether my move was better or worse. After the opponent made a move, I do the same thing in the next position. Make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So, but the question is, what games do you do? So I used to just pick some player that I wanted to play like. For example, let's say I had some games where I didn't do, missed opponents' resources, or I didn't do enough prophylactics or something, that I would pick Karpov's games. If I had a tournament where, I didn't play actively enough or aggressively enough in worst position or something, or didn't complicate the game what I needed to, maybe I would pick Korchnoi games, right? But this time, if I have a specific error, a specific problem that I found in my play, then I can drill down even more specifically to that problem. So I asked Mitch, I gave him a set of games by Fabiano Caruana, because I felt that he was really good in kind of like positions that are technically winning. So I gave him a set of games that he won, and I asked him just to pick those where there were only two pieces on the board for each side, two or fewer. So like rook and bishop versus rook and knight, queen and rook versus queen and rook, queen and bishop versus queen and, actually I think a constraint was that I'd be a rook on each side at least. So, or just a rook ending, right? So something like that, not a big middle game, but kind of like technical positions. So he picked out some games, and now the good thing about that is I don't actually know that in any particular case there's going to be a decision to be made, right? There might be a decision. I don't know when it's going to be and what the decision is, whether you're supposed to trade rooks or not, whether you're supposed to trade bishop or knight, right? That doesn't come with the game. I just have to play the game. So it's not like a puzzle, right? I'm just playing as if it's a normal game. So that's what I did in this case, and trying to help fix that problem. But the important thing is, after each tournament, you kind of like try to isolate what the problem was. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to me as the editor of Dvoretsky's Endgame manual that then, like I have memory of you, as we discussed in our prior interview, when I played Mitch and we reached some rook endgame and you were like immediately trying to solve the problem. So my perception of you is like an endgame specialist. So I was just surprised that that's what it was, but the approach certainly makes sense.
It's one thing to teach or write.
Right.
It's another thing to do it yourself, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, believe me, but end games are hard for everybody.
And
right?
you had a few in that tournament. You had some interesting ones.
In the senior?
Yeah.
You mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, part of it was just having the stamina, which we'll talk about also. But then I came up with another method, I shouldn't say I came up with it because I'd used it before sparingly. But towards the end of this period, in like April and May, Mitch and I went to Germany and played in Grenke. I came back and played in a tournament in Wyoming. Mixed results, as usual for me, but some good, some bad, right? But there were a couple of problems that I found that I really were warning signs for me. And it was that there were two games that I failed to win in the King's Indian as black, right? And King's Indian is one of my favorite openings. And furthermore, both games required me to sacrifice material. Okay, sacrifice a piece. And at the critical time. And I knew that it was a critical time. Each game I thought for about half an hour on that move, but I didn't find the sacrifice. One case, it was just an immediate sacrifice. And I think I was looking at one version of it, but didn't find the right version. And the second time was like, I had to play a move and then the sacrifice is the second move, right? And I kind of didn't see it, especially the second game. It was like, that would have won the game, would have ended the game. It was against a strong Grandmaster too. So, and I was pretty upset with myself because this is something I should be finding, right? Combinational play, initiative as black in a King's Indian type of structure where in both times you're using your dark squared bishop. That should be my strength, right? And I'm not finding this. So I said, wait a minute, what's going on? Maybe I did too many Karpov games. Like what's going on? Do too much solitaire with Karpov games. And I said, well, okay, so there's a problem. I'm not finding combinations. How do I fix that? Is it just because I'm getting old, right? Is it just because I can't calculate variations? So what do I do? So then I said, okay, this is where it helps to have a library of old games. So this method that I decided to use for this was I took a book of games by Paul Keres. Okay, Paul Keres is known as a combinational player, right? I don't know. What do you think about Paul Keres? If I asked you like to describe Paul Keres' style or like his approach to chess, what would you say?
Yeah, I have to admit, I'm not well versed enough in his games to. He's kind of slipped through the cracks for me. So
Yeah, me also.
Yeah.
Surprisingly enough, I wonder why. I guess he had a book, right? He had a book, 100 Selected Games.
Yeah.
And did you ever see that book?
I mean, people have recommended it here. I think
But was it ever published in English?
I think it was reassured recently, if I'm not mistaken.
Like a year ago.
Yeah.
A year ago.
Yeah.
Not reissued, but I think published. I think excerpts from it were published for the first time, as I understand. I don't know. Maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong, but that book was published in Russian in the 1960s, 1964, I think. It covered the period up to, maybe 1965, right? And I've always had that book, right? But it wasn't like one of the, as you say, it kind of like slipped through the cracks a little bit. But I looked at his games and looked at his analysis especially, right? Turns out that his analysis is extremely deep. Okay, he analyzes combinational positions deeply. No, needless to say, this was before the computer era, right? It's very important to look at games pre-computer, because after computer, the people are not really writing books; they're just using their engines to write books. Even Kasparov's great predecessor's book, which is a great piece of literature as a historical document, you're just using the engine.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so it's important for you reading books. It's important to read books prior to 1990. Right? After 1990, to various degrees, you're just using engines. Okay? Many of these books, of course, you're not going to find new books from prior to 1990. Many of these books I've read many times. But still, a lot of games, you can look at analysis that you haven't looked at. I was surprised to see Keres going many moves deep in variations, combinational situations, and not just for himself, but for his opponent. Right? And he did it in a very analytical way without guessing. Like I've concluded that intuition was a weakness of Keres. His strength was analytical thinking and precise calculation. Okay, so what I did is I took a few games, and the method is this. So I take a position from the game, let's say for move 25 or something, where he starts going deep, analyzing this deep variation, which didn't happen in the game. Okay. And then I try to find a mistake in that variation. Okay. So I do this without moving the pieces. So I set up the position on the board, set up a clock. I have his analysis, his moves. So so I'm starting with something. I'm starting with his variation. I'm not finding it on my own. But then I go and try to find, obviously no engine, right? Just the board in front of me and the clock, no moving the pieces, trying to find a mistake in his variation. So, the mistake, I call this method the post-postmortem, for want of a better, because his analysis usually comes from some kind of post-mortem. Well, I'm kind of making a post-mortem of that, right? You can do this with any player, by the way, of course. And I've done this with many other players as well. Experience shows that roughly half, give or take, of variations will have a mistake.
And do you use the engine to check your checking? Like how do you...
of course.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll get to that. Of course, right. So about half of the variations will have mistakes. If it's tile writing, then it's going to be more than half having mistakes, because he didn't actually do any postmortems. He just memorized he just remembered what he thought during the game and put that in his book. He didn't actually go through it again, right? Someone like Fisher, he had a very low rate of mistakes. So in Fisher's case, maybe only 20% of non-trivial variations would have had mistakes. And the mistake could be a serious one, like, some massive tactic missed where white was winning instead of black. Or it could be a little bit more subtle, like you're ending in a position where you think white's better, but actually black is better, or white's not better, or maybe there's some. So the mistake could range from a big mistake to a small mistake. Small mistake is probably not a big deal, but so it's very hard to do this, of course. It's not something that commonly most people would be able to do. So like for somebody who is not at the Grandmaster level, they probably want to start with something simpler, like variation that maybe doesn't go 10 moves deep.
Right.
Maybe not Keres, but somebody like Reinfeldt.
Yeah.
Or or something where that's not even a tactical thing, but more of a position. Mistakes could be strategical as well as tactical, right? But for me, I needed the combinations, right? That's where my problem was. So, and by the way, I showed this method to a couple of my friends who are at the Grandmaster level, and they were like, "This is too hard." So what I've recently discovered, and I've used this method before. I've done it probably a few times with Tal. With Tal's games, I did this on a number of occasions, and I always found that he had many mistakes, and it was easy to find them, but it always got to the point where it's not very interesting anymore because almost every variation had mistakes. But at the same time, there are only so many Tal games, right? I know all of them already. I did it with some Bitfinex games about a year or two ago and found that his analysis became more precise as he aged, actually. When he was younger, he was making more mistakes. With Keres, it was particularly interesting. So what's kind of unusual here is you don't actually have a puzzle. You don't have a problem. You don't know if there's going to be a mistake, right? Sometimes there are no mistakes to find, okay? And in that case, you just have to say, okay, there wasn't a mistake. If you say that there was a mistake, when there wasn't a mistake, then you have made a mistake, right? So it's like there's two ways of being wrong. You can be wrong by thinking there's a mistake when there wasn't one. You can be wrong by not finding a mistake when there was one. You can only be right one way, and that is that you find a mistake. Or you could be right by saying there was no mistake when there wasn't, not finding a mistake when there wasn't one, or finding a mistake when there was one, right? So, and then after like 45 minutes or an hour, you check with the engine and depending on the complexity of the position, might only take you 15 minutes or 20 minutes to find a mistake. And sometimes you have to keep thinking, right? But history shows that about half the time there will be a mistake, roughly. So you got to keep thinking, right? And try to find something, some improvement somewhere, right? And then you check with the engine what you've done. So what's different about this versus other types of exercises, right? This is not an exercise. You don't know a priori whether there's anything to find, right? Number two is you're forced to actually look at the position several moves deep, right? When you're being given an exercise, find something, you may just not find it. You don't know where to look. Here, you're actually forced to look in a certain direction, 5-10 moves. You have to, because how are you going to, you have it in front of you. They gave you the variation. You got to figure it out. And number three is number three related to number two, you're forced to visualize. So the visualization, and you mentioned visualization, one of the Chessable courses. I haven't seen that course. I don't know how people think about visualization, but I'll tell you this: visualization is the thing that older people start losing the ability to do. I just know from myself, from my own experience, as well as from talking to other people, my friends who are my age or older. They're saying that, dude, I can't see, you're giving me this Keres thing 10 moves ahead. I'm having trouble seeing the position 3 moves ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. So visualization is the thing that suffers first and hardest at our age, I think. Memory is another, but visualization is one. So this trains that skill, because you're forced to visualize. You have to visualize this position that comes 5 moves deep, and you say, okay, what's going to happen? And then from there, you have to start calculating. I think that method, have you ever seen people talk about this method? Okay. Yeah, it's not new. I mean, for example, Mark Dvoretsky had in some of his books, he had exercises like that. Here's a variation, find the mistake. Okay. I think in his first book, the one about endgames, he had like endgame studies where there was like false endgames, false solutions to endgame studies, right? Here's a solution to the endgame study, find the mistake in the solution, or it might be an alternate solution, right? He's had stuff like that. So that's where you kind of, now the question is, are you allowed to move the pieces or not, right? Or do you start with a position and not move the pieces? I generally try not to move the pieces because you're not supposed to do that in a real game. But depending on, number one, your skill level, number two, the complexity of this particular position, maybe you make the first 3 moves and think from there, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of one of the parameters you might set. So it's not a new exercise per se, but people don't do it anymore because we're now at kind of the computer age, right? Nobody thinks it's interesting anymore. You just use the engine to do it, but it's still interesting, especially with pre-computer books. And also you get a sense for the Grandmaster's mistakes or the Grandmaster's strengths and weaknesses. But most importantly, you train in yourself the ability to visualize and the ability to calculate. And I think that helped me during this tournament.
And how much training were you doing with all this newfound free time? Like how many hours a day do you think you were studying?
Well, it's not all studying. I play a lot of speed chess also, right? You have to keep that. The intuition is trained, your intuition level is kept up by playing lots of speed chess. I was also doing, regular kind of conventional exercise type things as well. I was doing some opening work, mostly towards the end, but there's always a little bit of opening work as well. How many hours a day? I don't know, like probably 7 or 8 on average, maybe 6 or 7. I don't know. Some days, including speed chess, right?
And opening wise, I did play through, as I mentioned to you before we were recording, I played through your games in the US senior closed.
Yeah.
But I didn't cross check. I saw you were playing E4 and the English, double king pawn, some Nimzos, some Bogos, but I didn't cross check that with your prior repertoire. Was there new stuff in there? What was your approach opening wise?
There was some new stuff, but most of my opponents escaped it. I found that a lot of my opponents tried to actually veer away from even their own repertoire just to escape a surprise. And I asked after the tournament, I asked a couple of people, was that just something that I felt? Say, no, we're all doing that because we just don't want people to surprise us. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. In the first round, I was playing against Igor Novikov. Igor Novikov is known to be a player with a very narrow repertoire, plays the same thing all the time. It was always easy to surprise him in the opening. Okay. So I prepared a surprise for him in the Queen's Gambit type thing, right? And I played C4 on move 1. Against D4, I was afraid he played some kind of Nimzo Indian, which he also sometimes plays. So I played C4, and then he played E6. I played Knight C3, and I was thinking he played D5 when we go to this Queen's Gambit, where I had something for him prepared. Instead, he goes Knight F6 in move 2, which is not something he doesn't usually play. And then we get this, I played E4, because at D4 you can play the Nimzo Indian. I played E4, and he gets this English variation, which is good for white objectively, but I didn't know it, and I got a bad position. So he actually surprised me. I was trying to surprise him, and he surprised me instead. And then I said, okay, maybe I should just stick to my repertoire against these guys for the most part. So I found that for the most part, they were trying to surprise me, and I must say not very successfully, because they ended up getting into positions which, even though objectively in the opening they might have been okay, they were positions which were closer to my repertoire than theirs. For example, Shabalov played Queen B6 line, but he played a Scheveningen type position, and objectively he got a good position. But I have a good understanding of those positions. Same thing with Gregory Kaidanov.
Yeah, and you probably, as you mentioned, one of your advantages was that you've been playing more frequently, and it strikes me like if they're adding a layer of unfamiliar openings on top of not playing as much, it's an added degree of difficulty.
I was a little bit lucky with colors. I got 5 whites, always good, out of 9 games. I got white against some of the most difficult opponents that I'd lost to many times before. Like against Shabalov, I had white. Against Gregory, I had white. That made a difference. And so the colors worked out in my favor as well for them, overall.
And you mentioned in your interview with Yasser and Nazi Bakidsi that Akopian was the player you felt was the strongest. Yes. As you mentioned, a field full of legends, but you felt like he was a notch above. What separates him?
Well, I don't know. I mean, he's just better. He was number 11 in the world at one point, and he finished second place in the world. They had that the first FIDE World Knockout Championship, remember, in 1998, which Halifman won. He finished second. He lost the match to Halifman, close match in the 3.5, 2.5. So, and yeah, I mean, he was, what separates him from the rest of us? I don't know. He's probably just more talented than some of these other guys. He grew up in the Soviet Union. He studied in the Botvinnik school. He studied with Kasparov. I mean, he's just his style is like kind of typical Armenian, very, very solid sort of positional style. like Petrosian type player. Doesn't lose any games ever. And he's also very strong tactically, like Petrosian was. So yeah, I mean, he's just a very, very good player. So I thought that, you know, and he's also younger than, he's the youngest player in the tournament.
Right.
That gives him an advantage as well. He was a clear favorite without any, and he was a defending champion.
And you pointed out in your interview that the 3 players who made the playoffs were the 3 youngest players.
Right.
How much, so you think it's just energy? Like, why is it so important?
Well, I think that, so I'm 57. I think Shab is 57, same age as me, if I'm not mistaken. Akopit, I think, is around 54. The next oldest player was Max Lugi. I think he's 59. Everybody else is 60 and over. I think around the age where I'm at, like 50s, mid to late 50s, you start losing some mental capacity. You start losing the ability to, your memory goes down significantly, short-term memory. You might forget what you were thinking a minute ago, okay? Or 3 minutes ago. You might forget the variation you had just, and that's another thing, by the way, that this training method helps, because you're forced to calculate these variations. You're sitting in front of the same variation all the time. You're forced to remember what you had just calculated, right? And so that's part of it. I think the stamina's a little bit of part of it too. A couple of people pointed out to me after the tournament that I seem to have more energy at the end of the games, 3rd and 4th hour of the game. But I think that part of that is just playing a lot.
Yeah.
When you play a lot, you're playing as kids, right? They're very energetic. So yeah, I mean, I read Korchnoy's autobiography called Chess is My Life.
Yeah, great
and he has
book.
a chapter. He has a chapter there called I Feel My Age, and he mentions that. Now, of course, Korchnoy is not. He's a sort of he is, you know, not in sample type of thing, right? Nobody has the same life story as he does,
right.
But he mentioned that for the first time he felt that he had trouble playing at the age of 56, I think, 19, or maybe 55 or 54, in the mid 80s, right? He started having trouble, you know, he didn't have energy towards the end of the game. Even though his openings were good and everything, he had trouble finishing the games. So yeah, I think that this is the age where things start happening, and so it does make a difference.
And as Grant Owen, I think he mentioned, maybe in one of your Facebook comments, but he, of course, being one of the organizers down at the Charlotte Chess Club, he said that going into the tournament, he was telling people, Alex is going to clean up here because he's been, you know, through the meat grinder and all these open tournaments.
I didn't hear that, but clean up was a little strong.
Well, he said you were definitely going to gain rating. He said,
gain rating, right? Yeah, gain rating, sure. So I'll talk about the rating thing, right? So this whole rating thing is just a mirage, right? I mean, the extreme example is Larry Christians. By the way, Larry is extremely talented player. I have a tremendous amount of respect for him. He's really good, and he always plays well in these tournaments. Surprisingly enough, even though he's only plays once a year, he invariably does well. And in this case, he wins the last game against Lugi. He's outright champion, right? If he draws against Lugi and he had to draw an ending, like, he's tied for first. He's tied for first, I think, twice already in this tournament prior to now, and lost out in the playoff. So he has a great record in these tournaments. But you put him in a like a weekend Swiss. I mean, he'll tell you that himself. He doesn't play 2 games a day. He refuses, basically.
Yeah.
He refused for a long time to play 2 games a day. You put him in a 2-game-a-day tournament where he's playing against 13-year-old kids who are rated. His rating's going to drop 200 points.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's just not the same game anymore. It's 2 games a day. It's hard. These kids are going to play to the end. It's just going to be a totally different kind of game. So, 1 game a day is, you know, it's a different game. And my rating is based on those other tournaments. You know, I'm not 200 points weaker than Larry. Even on my bad day, I'm not 200 points weaker than Larry, right? I'm not 100 points weaker than Max, you know, and so, or Joel, right? Because, you know, it's just that I'm playing in these meat grinder tournaments, and I know that, so I don't really care. Like, I know my rating is going to go down when I play them. You know, statistically speaking, if you're playing against a kid, an 11-year-old kid who's rated 2100, whether it's USCF or FIDE, I don't care. the probability that they're stronger than that is high because they're on their way up. For them to get from 1900, if you know anything about statistics, you don't have to be a genius, right? If you, from then get to 1900 to 2100, they had to play at a 2300 level, right? To gain those 200 points. So if they're on their way up, they're sort of automatically already underrated, right? So, and then plus you're in a situation where you have 2 games a day, you have a half hour between games. You're just put in conditions where, where you're just at a big disadvantage. So yeah, I mean, the rating is just a complete mirage, right? The fact that I was seated number 9 coming in is absolutely meaningless.
But some people, it's very tiring to play in those tournaments, but I think also some people might not play in them partially because they don't want their rating to take that hit. So, and that applies obviously to your fellow grandmasters, but even to amateurs like myself and people listening. So what do you think it is that makes you not care? What advice can you give to people?
Actually, Gregory asked me that after the tournament. He said, "You don't seem to care about your rating."
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, I don't. Well, I mean, one thing for me, to be honest, right? I have as yet have not given many. I give lessons very infrequently. Okay. That may change in the near future, and I have given lessons in the past. But for this last year, I did not, and for the last several years, I have not given lessons. I had, I have a family life, I have a job, and I have chess. If you don't have to constantly maintain your reputation or gain new students, then what is that rating? Like, what is just a number? Like, do I really care if my rating is 2450 or 2500 or 2480? Like, my USCF rating has been in the range of 2450 to 2525 for the last 4 years, I think, since the pandemic, 3.5 years. And before this tournament, it was near the bottom of the range. Now it's closer to the middle or top of that range. Do I really care? Like, does it make me a different player? I mean, if my rating starts dropping to where it's 2300s or something, okay, maybe. But then that means I'm playing worse, right? But if it just drops by 50 points or so, I mean, I don't know. Rating does matter for your self-esteem for sure. But it's just not if you're finding that you're losing rating points, then maybe you're just overrated to begin with. Maybe I was overrated when I was 2550 or 2600. But okay, but this is my rating based on the tournaments that I'm in. It's the pool that you're in, right? Yeah. For example, famous story from the 20th century. This guy Claude Bloodgood who was in jail, right? Mm-hmm. And he got invited to the U.S. Championship by rating, but these prison ratings were they had their own rating system. His ratings were he was rated 2600 in prison, right? You heard.
I forgot about that, sure. But yeah, I remember. Yeah. I remember. But
so the rating is just a function of the pool that you're in, right?
Yeah.
A rating is it's a very complicated statistical system. This whole rating system, how well you're actually playing.
Yeah, and obviously there's geographical pockets, both at the international FIDE level, but even within the U.S.,
right.
If you have a lot of local players at a given club, there can be 150 point difference in playing level or something.
I mean, yeah, obviously it sucks to lose your rating, but I mean, okay, it's part of life, It's how well you play. Are you winning tournaments? Are you coming in and, winning Grand Prix tournaments? Are you winning your state championships? Are you competing at decent level in things like the World Open, Chicago Open?
And as someone who plays so much more than your contemporaries, do you think there's any other elements? Do you think you just enjoy it more? Do you recover from losses better? What else is it that makes you play when others step back?
Okay. Well, they do teach. A lot of them, probably all of them teach a lot, right? That takes a lot of time. It's more financially rewarding to teach than to play. I have not been a professional player. I've had a job. If I decide to become a professional chess player in the future, which I probably won't, I'll probably come back to finance. But if I do, I may have to make that decision, whether to play or to teach, right? Because obviously one is more rewarding financially. You're not going to make a living by playing tournaments. So that's part of it. And there's several people in this tournament who've told me, yeah, I mean, I can play in this tournament, but I can make $1,000 just staying home and doing other important work, right? And teaching is important work as well. I don't at all, I have great respect for that as well. So that's part of it. And as far as enjoyment of play, okay, I think we all enjoy the game. By the way, it's important when you work on chess, any kind of work that you do, whether it's training or playing, has to be enjoyable, right? Otherwise, why are we here, right?
Yeah.
We could be doing other things, right? Chess is not something you want to do if you don't enjoy it.
I have to say, Alex, the find the mistake thing to me, it didn't sound that fun.
No, that's actually a lot of fun.
Is it?
For me, it is a lot of fun, yeah. Because it's hard, but it's good work. I mean, you're looking
I'm sure
through
it's rewarding when you get it right.
It's rewarding when you get it right, and it's also interesting when you get it wrong, because for me, it's like you're now in the laboratory of the greatest player in the world, one of the greatest players in the world, Paul Keres. You're basically sitting there with him.
Right.
Okay, he's going over these games years after they're played sometimes. You're actually sitting there with him and say, okay, Paul, knight f3 here. What about knight f5 instead? Or you're actually sitting there and talking to him, right? So it's a lot of fun, right? Now, as far as playing, okay, so another factor is, so some of these guys let's say, have different histories in chess, right? So maybe they've achieved more in the past than I have, for example, right? I might have some unfulfilled desires.
Right.
I've never been US champion, for example. Not that I think I can ever do that, but just as an example, these guys, the current situation that I'm not going to be US champion. Maybe I can, at one point, even just to qualify and play against those guys, right? Fabian, that would be fun. But a lot of these people have already done it, right? Joel has been U.S. champion, I think 3 or 4 times. Shab has been U.S. champion similar number of times. Most of the players in this tournament have been at that level. Gregory Kaidana, for example, played against Magnus Carlsen just 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So, okay, there's an open tournament, but still, I mean, a lot of these people have had peaks that were higher than mine by quite a bit, and have been at the upper echelons of chess, and I haven't. So maybe that's part of it. Maybe I still have some ambitions, perhaps. This is the first time I won a national championship of any kind, right?
How did it feel, by the way?
Well, I mean, I must say, if you watch that interview, I mean, you could see that I was pretty emotional.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, yeah, it's good. It's good. It was good to feel that, I did work hard. Again, the work is enjoyable, but it was rewarded. And, at a certain level, like I've dedicated a lot of time and energy to the game over time. And it certainly feels good to be successful, even if you get lucky once in a while, but still.
I mean, luck never hurts.
No. And I don't think it was just luck. It was luck played part of it. But I think that, the playoff, for example, the statisticians gave me a 12% chance, but I didn't think I had a 12% chance. I think I had a decent chance. It wasn't high. It wasn't 50%, but I thought that, I'm in the 30s somewhere.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing as what you were saying about ratings. I mean, the stats are based on ratings. And as you say, it's, they're not.
Right. So, I mean, these guys did have the advantage over their careers of being professional players for the most part, and I was not. So there is a question of how good I would have become if I had chosen to stay, to pursue chess as a career. Maybe I would have become 2650. I don't know. I don't think so. I think I would have made 2600. I don't think I would have made 2650, but you never know. But yeah, I mean, I like chess. I still study a lot, read old books, new books, analyze games, and I like the game. It's a big passion for me, so obviously it feels good.
Any new book recommendations?
I actually recently I read this book by Michael Adams.
Think Like a Super
book, right? Yeah, not a new book, right?
It's a great book.
Yeah. I just read it recently.
I mean, it still qualifies. It's only a few years old.
Yeah, I found it to be interesting. It's a little bit, for players, a little bit lower level than me.
Yeah.
I think, but that's okay. I found some of the positions to be too easy for me, but I think for a little bit weaker player, I think it would be just right. And I think his approach is good. It's good that they're looking at how different minds think. Michael Adams obviously is a near genius, so it's interesting how he thinks.
Yeah.
I don't use the word genius, lightly, or genius. So, but what other books? I can't think of any off the top of my head, but that's one I bought recently.
And what about you? Are you working on any new books?
Well, there is this Advanced Endgame Manual, 6th edition, which I worked on editing. So that's not really my book. And yeah, I don't know. Not at the moment. I'm not working on any new books at the moment, but I've always wanted to write something of my own. That's not just some revised version of somebody else did 100 years ago, but something I actually did myself. And maybe this tournament gives me more of an impetus to do that, but I haven't decided yet.
Okay, that would be fun.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Alex, it's been great to hear your story. So obviously what you did, you're even, obviously it's at a very high level. So do you have any recommendations for players of lower levels where maybe is there anything they could incorporate that you don't feel talked about as much?
Yeah. So of this type of thing that I've talked about, I think analyzing your games and trying to so if you have a coach, right, then your coach is probably going to have other students, right? He's not going to be focusing just on you. Yeah. I'm very lucky with Mitch, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't have 20 other students, although he does have a full-time job. But I can usually ask him to do something, he'll do it for me.
Right.
You have a coach, he's going to have many other students, right? Sometimes you have to do a little bit of your own work, isolating your mistakes in the games. So you don't have to be a very strong player these days to find what mistakes you made. A computer can give you that, right? You do have to be a somewhat strong player to kind of like diagnose them. Your coach can help you to do that. But you can, to some extent, do that yourself. Like maybe you tend to make mistakes in open positions or in closed positions, maybe like broadly what kind of mistakes you made. And then maybe come to your coach and say, look, it feels like I'm doing this wrong. Here's an example. Here's some games that I played where I've blundered my knight in such a way, or I didn't understand weak squares or something like that, right? And this is where the hard part is. It's how do you actually improve? How do you train? Because it's one thing to know what the mistake was. It's another thing to actually do exercises that will help you erase that mistake, right? So for those that don't have a coach, I would recommend, if you're looking at books, old books by older players, do a better job of teaching, these more or less specific things than newer games or newer books, because in the old days, people used to have much more individual styles. Like, for example, if you find that you're having trouble attacking, you just pick up Tal's games and he'll teach you that, right? Whereas nowadays, everybody is good at everything, right? So number one, figuring out what your mistakes are, going into the literature, trying to see how other people think about those mistakes. You don't have to be a great player to do that. And then the most important thing in my mind is, and I hate to say it, but you got to play. You got to play a lot, right? You got to be active. 50 games a year is probably not enough. That's probably a minimum that keeps you just above water in terms of activity. I think that's my number one advice, because that's going to enable you to, judge yourself and to kind of, follow your path in chess, and yeah.
All right. Great advice. Yeah. And I think you're right. It doesn't mean that you have to play 50 games a year, but you've got to moderate your expectations if you don't, or look for, there are joys to derive other than seeing your rating go up, because it'll be harder for it to happen if.
But also just have fun. Like, this is just a game. At the end of the day, this is a game. This is not some kind of science or world crisis thing. This is a game. There are many other things you do in life other than playing chess. If you're not finding it interesting, if you're not finding it fun, you shouldn't be doing it. So if you have a passion for it, if you enjoy it, okay. I mean, your rating could be lower than it was a year ago or 2 years ago or whatever, but you have to enjoy the process, right? That's the most important thing.
Great note to end on. Well, Alex, congratulations. Look forward to your continued.
Well, thank you very much, Ben.
Renaissance, and
it's always going to be a up and down battle. Like, there's going to be peaks and valleys, and I had a good tournament here, and there are going to be good tournaments and bad tournaments in the future. So,
but flags fly forever, as they say in sports.
They do. They do. That's true. That's true.
All right. Well, congrats, Alex. Take care.
Thank you very much, Ben.
Okay.
Talk to you later.
Bye.